Couple maybe introductory words. What a good and glorious thing that we are able to practice our religion freely, including forums and nights where we can address things like the civil magistrate. The Bible addresses the civil magistrate. And so what an awesome thing that it is to be able to practice religion like this freely. Let's pray together. Lord, we are so grateful indeed that we live in this land. Lord, you have blessed us beyond measure. And Lord, we know that with as much as you have blessed us, there is tremendous responsibility. Lord, our desire is that we would not be found lacking, but that you would, through us, that you would do great things, that we would be good stewards, good servants, caring for all the things that you have generously given to us. Lord, our desire is that you would receive the glory and the honor in this evening. And so we ask for your blessing, your benediction upon our time together. For everybody who's here, for everybody who's watching online, Lord, receive all the glory for your sake. Amen. All right, well, we have with us Brian Almon, Gem State Chronicle. He's going to give you a little bit more about himself, but I do want to introduce him as a friend, as somebody who I, over the last several months, have grown to trust in his reporting and coverage of local and state politics. This may come as a surprise also. I don't agree with him on everything. But I respect him tremendously and am very grateful that he accepted my invitation to come to be with us. And again, as we prayed, my hope is that this night would be a blessing. So please welcome up Brian Almon.
All right, can you hear me? Yeah, I don't think I've ever worn one of these before. So just a little background about myself before I get into whatever it is I'm going to talk about. I don't have a written speech, just going off the cuff, what's on my heart, what's on my mind. So I hope it makes sense. I've lived in Western Washington most of my life, from the age of 4 until about the age of 35. So coming out here, it's a bit of a difference. There's not as many trees, not as many mountains. But there's a lot more like-minded people, which is the reason I came. My wife and I, we had 2 children at the time. We took 4 months off in between. I quit my job, we sold our house, bought a van, traveled the country. We went as far as Texas and Virginia, saw some Civil War battlefields, went up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, saw the country, and then we ended our journey in Eagle, Idaho. A lot of my wife's family had moved over there, so we followed them. Since then, I've had 3 more children, so that's a total of 5, if you had public school math. And at first, my background's in IT, so at first I started my own business doing computer repair and consulting, network administration, and that's what I was doing. But eventually, I started getting pulled more into the political sphere. I was a precinct committee officer in Washington, in King County, and that place is going in the wrong direction. We moved away in 2018, and I saw the writing on the wall. I lived in Washington my whole life. They haven't elected a Republican governor since before I was born. Every 4 years, they would come up, and the Republican candidate would say, look how bad things are. It's getting worse. Vote for me. We'll fix this. And the Democrat would say, it's getting bad, but don't worry. We've got this. You can't trust the Republicans. They'll just make it worse. And every 4 years, they voted for the Democrat, except for that one time in 2004, when Dino Rossi actually won and was confirmed on a second recount. But then they did a third recount and found some ballots in a box in a trunk in Seattle, and that's just the way things go. So I saw which way the wind was going. And having visited family over here, we saw that this would be a better place for my children to grow up. And I've second-guessed myself a few times through 2018, 2019. I left a good job. We had a good house. It was a good community. All my family's over there. Did I make the right choice? Am I, asking God these things? Which, is this you leading me here, or did I mistake something? But then COVID happened, and as much as we complain here, and there's a lot to complain about, the governor did issue a stay-at-home order. Health districts did, establish mask mandates. People were arrested for praying outdoors or taking their children to the park. Those things did happen. But as bad as that was, it would have been 100 times worse for me personally, being back in Washington. I watched some of my old friends, coworkers, family members, what they went through, the things that they had to adapt to. A lot of working from home. Nobody can go outside without a mask. Vaccine mandates everywhere. And that confirmed my decision. I made the right choice at the right time. God was leading me, and I am so thankful for that. So I came here. Like I said, I got it, back into the IT business because that's what I knew. But I quickly wanted to get involved in politics. In, what was it, May of 2020, maybe June? I don't remember. After nobody would return my emails, I kept emailing people I would find on the Republican website, and nobody would return it. I don't know, it might have gone to spam. But I looked up on their calendar and saw that there was a meeting one day. And so I just walked into the meeting. And first of all, this was in spring of 2020, and nobody was wearing masks. So I knew I was in the right place. And it turned out to be the reorganization meeting. If you've been involved in party politics, that's when the new PCs come together and elect their new leadership and send delegates to the convention. I walked out of there as an alternate PC and an alternate delegate to the convention. So that's one lesson that everybody should learn. When it comes to political parties or political organizations, they're always looking for volunteers. They're always looking for people. There is a place for you. Whether it has a title or no title, whether it's exciting or boring, there's always a place. So the rest is history. Now it's been 4 years, and somehow I've just gotten my fingers into all sorts of things. After a while, January 2022, I started writing a Substack newsletter. I'd actually had another blog that I did with podcasts and everything, and nobody listened to it, nobody followed it, maybe a couple dozen people. And it was just high-level political philosophy. It was ideas of what's going on at the national level and where are we going, how did we get here, the stuff that I find interesting. But I started to realize that where we're really going to have value, where we're really going to get a return on our investment of time and energy and money is at the local level. There's not much any of us in this room can do to move the whole ship of state at the national level. We can email our congressmen and our senators, but they get a lot of emails. And they walk out from having checked their emails and they hear from a lot of lobbyists and a lot of people with a lot more money than any of us. And then in the end, they're only 4 out of 535 people. And those 535 people in our Congress, they really don't control anything anymore, do they? Oh, they'll vote on things, but the votes are already decided in advance. We're going to pass this money, $100 trillion for this thing or that thing, and then we'll let the bureaucrats worry about it. So I decided that I would have more bang for my buck at the local level. So I started writing about local politics, and I didn't really know much. Obviously, I'd been going to Republican Party meetings for a while, starting to get an idea of who's who and what's what. Had never been to the Capitol. Actually, way back in 2013, I was here because my wife was actually living here before we were married. That's how her family was here, like I said. And one of our first dates was in the Capitol. But little did I know how much time I would spend there in the future. But I just started writing, and I used it kind of as an outlet for my own thought processes as I'm learning, as I'm going on this journey. We had the 2022 primaries, and so I went out and I contacted all 6 of our legislative candidates in the primary and said, hey, can we talk? And surprisingly enough, they agreed. And we had good conversations, and I found things to like about all of them. And that's another thing I've learned about politics in Idaho, is that back in Washington, even as a PCO, there was often this wall between the people and the politicians. They were in one world, we were in another, and sometimes they would come down like the gods, see them putting their feet on earth from Olympus and meet with us. But usually they were doing their thing, we were doing our thing, and it's the two worlds didn't interact much. That was my feeling. Maybe it's just because I wasn't as involved as I became now, but here I feel like that's not the case. I run into my local representatives at the grocery store. walking around Boise at lunchtime during the session, I'll run into the Attorney General and have a chat. There's an access there that I'm not sure is the case in a lot of states. That's what I was discovering back in 2022 as I was first getting involved in this, that it creates an opportunity that people in other states don't have to really influence local politics, because this is the way it's supposed to be. I think the way we have it here is the way our founders intended it to be, to a certain extent, in that, remember, if you ever saw the John Adams miniseries on HBO 15 years ago or so, it was really well done. There's scenes where people would just come into the White House and talk to the president, uninvited, no appointments necessary. Obviously, we can't do that anymore. A few folks tried to have an appointment with their congressman on January 6th in 2021, and that didn't work out. But you can still do that here. You can still just call up your representatives or candidates for legislature or county commissioner or city council or mayor, and most of the time they'll answer. Most of the time they'll be willing to have a conversation. Even if you just grab them on the street or in between committee meetings at the Capitol, usually they're there. And I think that's something that is easy to take for granted if you've been here a long time or if you've been involved for a while, is that it really is local politics as it should have been. And then, so that's something else I learned. I wasn't intending to spend this long on my story, but it keeps diverting off into rabbit trails, That's what happens when I don't have a script. So 2022, I decided to continue my involvement. I ran for PC in my precinct and won. It was an interesting time. There was another fellow who ran as well, and he was a good guy. He didn't do any campaigning. I did some, and I won by 30 votes, so that tells you exactly how much, what's your return on investment. 200 mailers, a couple of afternoons knocking on doors and handing out literature, and that'll win you, 15 votes to win by 30. So the work that PC candidates do should not be underestimated. I'm, involved in a lot of groups around here and supporting PC candidates, especially today with, these groups out there that are trying to win back control of the Idaho Republican Party, and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it. The former leadership, the people who used to be in charge until 2022, they're spending a lot of time, energy, and money to win back that control. And so watching candidates here go and spend weeks knocking on doors, knocking on hundreds of doors, every single one in their precinct, every single Republican, that's really what the party is about. That's what getting involved is about. It's about talking to people, talking to your neighbors, not even trying to convince them of anything, just sharing the importance of what you're doing. What is a PC? Why is it important that you have a choice as to who your PC is? What does it really matter? And that's got my timer there, so I don't go too long. And so that was something else I dipped my toe in back then. Ended up becoming a PC, becoming the secretary for District 14, which I'd already been doing on an acting basis for a while. Became a delegate, and again, it's, last I heard, Ada County here, they're still about 20 delegates short of the complete slate. It's a calculation based on how many voters there were in each county for the top getting Republican candidate. It's some weird math that determines how many delegates there are. But Ada County this year is going to have 105, and last I heard there were only 85 people applied. So if you haven't applied to be a delegate, if you want to go to Coeur d'Alene next month and take part in it, it's a lot of fun. My first convention was as an alternate in Nampa. They'd actually scheduled it for Boise, but the mayor and council decided to shut down all large gatherings. So they had to find a place to go at the last minute, and so they ended up doing it at the Ford Center, and it was still really ridiculous. They had the chairs 6 feet apart. It was crazy, but I saw very few masks at least. 2 years ago in Twin Falls, it was also a lot of fun. It's because when you get involved in the political process, you make connections with people throughout the state. You meet like-minded people from Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, Coeur d'Alene, Bonners Ferry, Sandpoint, Rexburg, Pocatello, and everywhere in between. And then you have this one event every 2 years where you get to go and hang out with all those people. And it really is a lot of fun. It's very uplifting. Even if you don't win every vote or you don't get all your resolutions passed, it's still just fun. It's fellowship. It's something that I think a lot of us took for granted until we were shut down due to COVID. It's really weird. I follow a lot of weird people on Twitter, but some folks were talking about the children coming up in public schools right now, the 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and what's happened to their development because in a lot of communities, they saw masks 24/7. They were isolated from their peers for these formative years of their lives. And I don't think we're going to know the full impact of that until 5, 10, 15 years down the road. It's kind of scary if you think about where our country is going. And that's why it's ever more important to be involved in the political process. The important thing that I took from COVID and what I'm hearing from a lot of people, I haven't even gotten to the Gem State Chronicle, what I do, but one thing I've been doing over the last month is doing interviews with legislative candidates, just Zoom interviews with candidates from across the state and just hearing their perspective. And one thing I've learned is that a lot of people got politically involved because of COVID, or because of the lockdowns, really. They saw what their government could do to them and decided they'd better take an active role in that government. And I think that's a story that's probably been repeated through not only throughout the state, but throughout the country. And that's why I keep telling people we're in uncharted territory politically, both as a state and a nation. All the old models, you got to throw them out. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow in our election day. I don't know if the establishment and their all their money and all their mailers and text messages is going to push us back into the box we were prior to 2020, or if there really is a conservative revolution out there and people are going to show up and make their voices heard. I can see it going either way. But what does happen is going to be a portend where our state goes for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I didn't move here to move somewhere else. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. Are you all native Idahoans, or did some of you come from outside? Yeah, we came from Washington. I know a lot of people came from California, Oregon. I guess they call it the cow states. Maybe that's why Representative Yamamoto called us all a bunch of cowbirds. And it's interesting, as I was driving here, I was listening to an interview that Speaker Mike Moyle was doing, and he was saying that it's the people coming from the outside who are going to break the state. And I agree with him on a lot of things, but I disagree on this. It's easy to see why people see things that way. Because you've been here, say you're a native Idahoan, you've lived here all your life, whether that's 20 years or 80 years, and things have been a certain way, and now, at the same time as all these people are coming from California and Washington and Oregon, things are just getting crazy. You've got pornography in the libraries. You've got schools doing transgender nonsense. Just really weird stuff is going on at the same time as it's going on in, throughout the country. And so it's easy to just blame that on the newcomers. It's easy just to say, well, they've brought this here, or they're stirring this up just because they want political power. And I see people do that on all sides, whether they're conservative or moderate, or the Democrats say the same thing. But I don't think that's the case. I assume most people here don't think so either. It's more like, there's a flood that's destroyed the house next to the ocean, and it's still coming in. The tsunami is still on its way, and so you're going further inland and warning people as you come, hey, that thing's coming, we need to get ready. Or, insert your analogy there. People have seen what's happened in other states, and they're coming here and not necessarily bringing it, but it's still coming. I remember talking to somebody about the whole porn in the library issue, and he was saying, well, that's not the case in our school. That's not the case in our library. Okay, you live in a small town, that's great. You know everybody, you know your librarians, you know your teachers, you trust them. That's great. That's what we should all aspire to. But there's this thing called the internet, and it's hard to put up walls on that. So even if you have a nice small town with small town values, your children growing up in the public schools they're seeing something else when they're on their phones 24/7, which they are. And their teachers, they're seeing the same things too. This influence is not, you can't just build a wall around your community and say it's going to stay out. It's like the tsunami. It's going to go over the walls. It's going to engulf us if we don't stand up and be proactive about stopping it. So, yeah, 2022, I started writing a Substack newsletter. At some point, I realized that I was spending more time doing political stuff than actually, fixing people's computers, which was paying the bills. So I, made a choice to move into politics full time and still fix computers on the side once in a great while. I worked for 9 months at Idaho Freedom Foundation doing communications. I learned a ton there, and then I set out on my own, started Gem State Chronicle. The whole reason I started its own website was because even after Elon Musk bought Twitter, one thing he doesn't like is competition. So if you post a link to Substack on Twitter, the algorithm will kill it. Nobody will see it. But if you post a link to the gemstatechronicle.com, then yeah, people will see that. I'll post a Substack link, it'll get maybe 40 views. I'll post the Chronicle link, it'll get 500, 1,000, 2,000. So it was really a way to just to get around that barrier, but it's been fun. It's been great. I'm able to dig in and see who's spending money and what races, what elected officials are doing, what they're saying. Today's article was just digging into some of the tough races. Here in the Treasure Valley, we don't have too many really tough legislative races. Either it's, people are unopposed, and I'm in District 14. None of our legislators drew a challenger, so there's nothing really to talk about there. But in a few of the races, you have to choose. And this is kind of the place where conservatives shoot themselves in the foot. Say, District 6, legislature, you have Representative Lori McCann, Vice Chair of the Education Committee. She's one of the reasons why it took 3 years to get a library bill through. She's one of the reasons why we don't have school choice yet, with money following the child. I could quibble with a lot more of her votes, too. But you look at the demographics of her district, and it should be a lot more conservative. It should be a place where you have someone like a Heather Scott or a Dale Hawkins. But instead, they have somebody who's a lot more moderate. Why? Well, she drew two challengers this year. Both of them are great guys. They're probably going to split the vote, and she's going to sail in with 35%, 40%. That's and that's just the reality of politics. It is what it is. So I wrote about that today. But I want to circle around, as we're nearing the end here, to something I wrote yesterday. There's always a question of how should Christians live in our modern society? How political should Christians be? I remember during the whole COVID lockdown thing, a lot of Christian leaders, they quoted Romans 13, which says that God has raised up our political leaders and we need to obey them. And I'm thankful that not everybody took that interpretation. I'm thankful that Pastor John MacArthur down in California did not shut down his church service just because Governor Gavin Newsom said he should. I'm glad he took a stand and showed that you can take a stand and that you can win by taking a stand. Gabriel Wrench and the others up in Moscow, Idaho, who they did not obey the law, the rule, the statute, whatever you want to call it, that said you had to wear a mask when you're outside. And they came out and they were praying and singing hymns and spent some time in jail for it. But they took that stand. And so it's something I've been thinking about ever since then. Because you have Romans 13. It says that God has raised up these leaders over us, and they wield the sword for justice. But then you also have Peter and John, when they're preaching the gospel, and the Sanhedrin calls them in and says, all right, we're not going to put you in jail, but you've got to stop preaching about Jesus. And they immediately started preaching about Jesus because if the law that you've been given from the civil authorities contradicts the law of God, then there is no choice about that. There is no option. And so again, it's something I've been thinking about. When Paul wrote Romans 13, he was living in a world where the Roman Empire was the supreme authority. Caesar had all the authority, and it trickled down from him. And often that meant life or death. A lot of the early Christians obviously faced persecution by their own government, by their own civil leaders. And many of them were offered ways out, just bow to this idol of Caesar, and you will be okay. Just disavow Jesus, and you will be okay. And I'm sure some did, but they're not the ones we remember today. The ones who did not and who faced martyrdom for their faith, we remember them and we honor them. Our situation is different. We don't live under an oppressive empire, at least not yet. I mean, we'll see what it looks like after November. We live in a republic. We live in a place where we, the people, are technically the supreme authority. Both the Idaho Constitution and the US Constitution start with the same three words, we the people. Because that is where our founders, both of our state and our federal government, recognized power comes from. Back in the day, the king was in charge, and people believed that that was because God has raised him up. And then when his son becomes the new king, well, God has raised up that king. And therefore, criticizing the king is like criticizing God. And you can't do that. But our founders didn't think that way. Obviously, they took up arms against their king's soldiers. They were following the political philosophy of John Locke, who said that there's always an option to go one level higher. If you disagree with your local magistrate, you can go to the next level. If you disagree with the opinion of a judge, you can go to the next level up. Eventually, the highest level, the highest human level, is the king. But what if you disagree with the king? What do you do then? Well, that's where you get the phrase appeal to heaven. You can appeal to the supreme judge. And in fact, in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson uses that exact phrase. They are appealing to the supreme judge of the universe for a redress of their grievances against this human king and his parliament. And they made that choice. Now, I hope we don't have to make that choice. I don't know, maybe someday. If that is to be our destiny, I hope it comes soon before my children are grown and have to face that world. Just as Thomas Paine says, if there must be a war, let it come in my time. But we do have an option that our founders didn't necessarily have, and that is we can be involved in the political process. We as we the people are not necessarily in the same position that the Christians in Rome were. We're not subjects with no rights, with no authority, with no ability to influence the process. Back then, Paul couldn't just call up Caesar and tell him to change his ways, although he did appeal to Caesar and eventually presumably had an audience. But we can call up our representatives and say, hey, why are you doing this? This law you passed, it seems immoral to me. It doesn't seem to align with the Constitution. Or maybe you should support this other law that is a moral thing or is in line with our Constitution. We have that ability, and especially here in Idaho, we have that accessibility. Or we can run for office ourselves. There's nothing stopping any one of us from, 2 years from now putting our names on the ballot to, replace whatever representative we have here. There's no guarantee of victory. And when you call up your representative, there's no guarantee they'll listen to you. But we have a lot of options. Numerous Americans back in the 18th century and 19th centuries would say that we have 4 boxes in our political system. The soapbox, which is kind of like what I'm doing here, just standing and talking, and really that's what I do for a living now. You have the ballot box, which is where you can go cast your vote. You can decide on new representation, new leadership. If that fails, you still have the jury box. You won't hear about it in a legal textbook, but you can, as a jury, make commentary on the law. If you feel like the law is immoral, you as a jury can nullify it. And then, of course, if all those fail, you still have the cartridge box. Our founders, they exercised all those rights. They were on their soapboxes. They were spreading pamphlets. They were writing treatises about why it was time to end the British rule of America. They had the ballot box, to an extent. They could vote for their local representatives. But they couldn't vote vote for a new king. It's not like Monty Python where you can say, well, I didn't vote for you. And they had the jury box, but the king tried to take that away. He tried to conduct trials, even though the trials in the Americas were fair. You all know the story of John Adams defending the British soldiers who had shot into a crowd at the Boston Massacre. And he actually got them exonerated because the evidence and the law was on their side. But even then, that wasn't good enough. King George took their trials and was starting to ship them to Canada or to London so that he could make sure to convict the colonists. And so eventually they had no choice but to go to the cartridge box. But we're still at the ballot box point in our journey. And we have an opportunity here in Idaho to really use that in a way that some other states don't. I saw some statistic. It's probably still true that there are more Republicans in California than in any other state in the nation, just raw population-wise. But there's also a lot more Democrats there too. Here, we have an 80-20 red state. And even if not all those 80% are conservatives, even if not all of them really understand conservative principles, a lot of them do. But a lot of them don't vote. Because why? Some people say that voting is pointless because it never changes anything. Well, I went through in my article yesterday a couple places where it did. You had Britt Rabel defeated Ron Nate in the legislature in the primary 2 years ago by, I want to say, 36 votes. And she and her friends in the PACs had to spend $200,000 to do that. In another race, Jeff Cornils over in Nampa defeated Michelle Hamilton by 74 votes. And those were just 2 races. There were several others that were also very close. And then you have the governor's launch grant, which passes the House by 1 vote. Had those 2 races not gone that way, had 50 more people, 100 more people voted, it would be very different. The bill would have been defeated, and that one issue would have not become law. And I'm not saying that's the end-all, be-all of all the issues, but I'm just demonstrating that 1 vote can make a difference. There was a bill in the Senate this year. It had already passed the House. It was to enroll Idaho into some sort of interstate counseling system where we would have to essentially standardize our counseling rules with other states. And there was a lot of worry that it was going to do away with our sovereignty because now we'd have to abide by the decisions in California and Washington, Colorado, and a lot of those people are forcing their counselors to do things like support transgenderism. And so there were some concerns about it. It passed the House, got to the Senate. A friend of mine called up our senator, Senator Grow, and told him, she's from the counseling field, and she explained to him why this is a bad idea. He took that letter that she wrote him on the Senate floor, read it out, and then voted against the bill. It failed by 1 vote. So your voice as a constituent matters. Your vote as a voter matters, and your legislator, even though they may be 1 person out of 105, they also matter. And that's why we are still in that ballot box section of our 4 boxes paradigm. We are still in a position where we can affect the outcome. And I believe it's imperative for Christians to do that. There's a temptation to just think that, well, we'll just leave it in God's hands. I mean, all the eschatological systems create a temptation to avoid the work. If you're premillennial dispensationalist, then you figure, well, it's going to get bad, then God's going to come back anyway, so don't do anything. If you're a postmillennial, then maybe you are tempted to say, well, eventually God's just going to come and make it a paradise, so again, I don't have to do anything. But both of those are the same error. Whether Jesus is coming back tomorrow, we need to get out and do the work. If Jesus is coming back 1,000 years from now, we need to get out and do the work. If our candidates win tomorrow, then our work has just begun. We need to get out there and do the work. If our candidates lose tomorrow, then we get up, shake ourselves off, and get back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. What we're going to do now is actually, Brian, don't go too far. We're going to invite, Josh, Tyler, Tom, Brian, and myself, and we are going to take your questions. We may also ask some questions of Brian or of each other, but this is really a time for you guys. And just know, too, that we can be very specific. There's no law against that. We can talk specific races or names. And my hope is that through this process, what we're doing on the panel is helping people to understand how to think about it and then what the proper tools are to move forward. So if you'll indulge us for a moment to get set up here. Again, if you walked in after I made this announcement through the double doors, we've got a drinking fountain, and then keep going and you have the restrooms. So just give us a moment. Thank you. Okay. I think what I'll do is actually I'll give Josh, Tom, and Tyler an opportunity to ask Brian, our speaker, one question. Doesn't mean you guys have to, but if you'd like to, I want to give you first shot at Brian. So, yeah, you can pass. I'm not going to twist the arms too hard, but Tyler.
There's one to your right there.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so you've been involved in Idaho politics since 2018?
There we go.
How's that? Good? We moved here in 2018, in September 2018.
That wasn't my question, by the way.
I've been involved in politics since I walked into that reorg meeting in summer of 2020. So
Okay,
4
so
years.
what do you think in all of your conversations with neighbors, Christians, church people, what do you think is the biggest obstacle that Christians have when it comes to being involved politically? Talking about it, talking about politics, applying a Christian worldview, like all of that, like what's the obstacle that's preventing Christians from being involved?
I would say the biggest thing I've seen is just an uncertainty of what to do, where to go, how to start. Now, I know there are some churches out there that are avoiding politics entirely, whether because they're, see it that way theologically or because they're afraid of losing their tax-exempt status. But for average Christians, and I think it goes for average people of all sorts, just how do you start? How do you get involved? What can you do? You go knock on doors, and most people don't know what a PC is. A lot of people don't even know who their legislators are. I've heard numerous stories from legislative candidates who will knock on doors and say, I'm running for House of Representatives, and they say, oh, in D.C.? Well, no. So it's just a matter of they're out there not knowing how to get involved. We're here wanting to get them involved, but how do we reach them? How do we make that contact and bring them into this conversation?
You're going to need a mic. It might be an obvious question, but in all the time that you've been covering politics, about 4 years or so, what would you say is the best example of seeing God working in the legislature or in some political race?
I don't know. I don't want to necessarily say this is what God did, but that one isn't. I'm always wary of making assumptions when it comes to God's work. But I think, I don't know if this is cheating, but I just feel like the growth of people getting involved over the last few years, what happened in that whole COVID lockdown was an awful thing. Not only, people did die, but also it was used to severely restrict our freedoms and to advance the cause of totalitarianism by huge steps. But seeing the reaction to that gives me hope. Sometimes people think I'm a little too pessimistic, too much of a black pill, as they say, because I talk to a lot of people who are very optimistic. They figure, okay, God is working, and we are going to have a revival in this country, a great awakening. What is it, third, fourth, fifth by now? And things are going to be different very soon. And I say, well, maybe. But God sent the Israelites into Babylonian captivity for 40 years. They were in Egyptian slavery for 400. The Soviet Union ruled for 74 years. That's an entire generation, entire lifetime. Communist China has been communist for 75 years and counting now. The Reconquista of Spain took 700 years after the Muslims took it over. So we can hope and pray for a revival that will happen within our lifetimes, but I think we need to prepare ourselves for the long, arduous task of just surviving, to pass down our teachings to our children, to create another generation that is ready to pick up the torch and continue fighting for the liberties that we once took for granted.
My question is, what do you think the biggest improvements that we can make by becoming involved politically to the application of faith in politics?
Well, I think just to take the first half of the question, the improvement of getting involved is to make our representatives more representative, make them more responsive to, who we are and to what we want to see. Right now you can get elected by, winning a primary with 20% turnout, and then you go to the Capitol and you're surrounded by lobbyists and PACs and people with big pocketbooks who they have their own ideas of how things should be, and you think you're doing your job by going in there and making things happen, even if those aren't necessarily good things. Getting more people involved, more voices in the ears of our representatives is a good thing. And then when it comes specifically to our Christian faith and our moral values, we need representatives who are not afraid to do that. You come out in favor of something Christian, something moral, and all the newspapers are going to have bad things to say about you. They will talk about you as a right-wing extremist, a radical, a Christian nationalist, and that's just for obvious things like getting pornography out of libraries. So we need legislators who are willing to stand on moral values. I feel like when I was growing up in the 90s, we had accepted this idea that the public square was neutral. America used to be a Christian nation, but then you have this revolution in the 50s, 60s, 70s that it kind of pushes that to the side. It says, well, you can be religious, but only in your own home. That government's not supposed to take a role in that. And I think by the 90s we'd accepted that okay, we can do that. We can have a neutral public square, neutral government, and then we'll continue to teach our values in our homes. But then the last 30 years have shown that there is no such thing as a neutral public square. If you're not teaching your values, someone else is teaching theirs. And you see in public schools and libraries and entertainment and media the values of a world that is hostile to Christianity. And they are pushing those very hard. And they pretend like it's not political. They come in and push transgenderism and LGBTQ stuff and diversity and critical race theory in public schools, and then when somebody shows up to a school board to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, they say, well, now you're politicizing the schools. Well, no, you guys did. You've been pushing this from the start. So getting people who are in office who are not afraid to actually stand on real moral values is the first step, and then supporting them. When they do what's right, when they stand on that and they start getting all this hate mail from the left and from the newspapers, you need to be just as proficient in giving them support. Make sure that people are emailing them and saying, good job, keep it up. Otherwise, they're going to feel like they're hung out to dry out there. So, yeah, we need bravery, courage, and we need to support the people who are doing that.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so who's up first? Who has a question? And it can be for anybody, any of us.
This is all great, but I don't want to talk too loud. The problem is we got a primary tomorrow. Most people don't know who anybody is. I've talked to my neighbors. They don't know who's running. They're not voting. I know there's a lot of people, I don't know if they're watching this, but that's what people need to know tonight is tomorrow, in Ada County here, we have a couple choices. A lot of them are running uncontested, of course, but the big one is our representative. We got three choices for state representative, Mike Simpson, and two others. I don't know about you, but I'd like one of those two others. Let's talk about what's going on tomorrow. This is great, but it's a little late. We need to do this again, but what about tomorrow?
Yeah, and so, John, that's exactly why we have tonight in this Q&A session is because I wanted to get very, very, very specific. So maybe I'll just kind of lead off and say, yes, we need to know what precinct you're in, but with respect to who we're going to send to U.S. Congress. I live in Mike Simpson's congressional district, and I'll be voting for Scott Cleveland. So, yep.
Who's the other choice, and why are you voting for
Jackie, one sec. Let me.
I know the other person, the third person, and I don't know why he's running. He doesn't have any money. He's not going out and talking to people. He's put a couple of signs up around town in Boise. He actually lives in my district, and we tried to talk him into withdrawing, and he has not. And that is I think it's Sean Higgins, a good Christian man, but he's just, I don't know why he's running, but we don't want to vote for him.
Well, that's the problem, is there's two to divide.
Yes, and we tried to get him to withdraw, and he refused.
I can weigh in on this.
Please do. Yeah.
Just
Thank you, Jack.
something else I've been thinking about lately, watching some videos on it and sharing some stuff, is that I think a lot of us have, or we grew up with a view of politics as it's maybe a debate club. It's a marketplace of ideas. It's a place where you come, you give your best idea, and your opponents give their best idea, and then the people in their infinite wisdom, they make the right choice. One of the things that you learn getting involved in the political system is that that's not the case. And it can be really demoralizing to learn this. Politics is almost like a zero-sum game. It's a war. It's a system, and it's not about having the best ideas. It's about getting the most people to the polls. And the Democrats have perfected this. Ballot harvesting is the ultimate example. They don't even care what people think. They don't even care what people want. They just go out there and say, vote for Biden, I'll take care of the rest. And that's, and it's a really cynical way of looking at things, but that's how our system is designed. They have figured out how to game our system. And we can either complain about it and say it shouldn't be that way. It's like if you're on the field in the Super Bowl and the referee makes a call that you disagree with, well, you can either sit there and complain, or you can just get out there and keep playing the game according to the rules as you now see them to be. And that's the rules. So we have two people running against Congressman Simpson. Why? All that can do is split the vote. And I hear a lot of people who want to get involved, and they say, well, it doesn't matter. We'll just let the voters decide. Well, I don't know Sean Higgins. I haven't talked to him. Jackie was saying he's a good man, but from what it sounds like, he's naive about how the system actually works. You have three candidates. If there's two conservatives and one moderate, the conservatives are going to split the vote. The moderate could win with less than a majority. And you see that happen. You go to Ballotpedia, which is a great resource, and look at all the races over the last few years where there's more than two people. Sometimes there's three, sometimes there's 4 or 5, but you always see that same thing. Our governor's race in 2018. Our governor's race in 2018 had 3 candidates. Brad Little, who was then lieutenant governor, won with about 37%. And interestingly enough, that's the problem that the ranked choice voting people are trying to solve, but I think they're going about it completely the wrong way. That's a whole another issue. So yes, we have Mike Simpson, incumbent congressman. He's been in public office for 40 years. He's been in office since almost as long as I've been alive. He was in the state legislature for, I want to say, 15 years, and now he's been in Congress for 25 years. In that time, he's gotten a lot of connections. He is supported by a lot of PACs, national super PACs, and he does what they want. He is on the Appropriations Committee, so he does some appropriating. He even called himself in an interview the appropriator. His job is to move money around. And the more money that he gives to his constituents, the more people like it, because it creates jobs, it creates projects. But is that really what we want our elected representatives to do? And that's one of the hard things. You're going out there trying to convince people to vote against this guy, and they say, well, but look at all the good things he's brought into our district. And so you have to get into a philosophical conversation there. Scott Cleveland, he ran for on an independent ticket against Senator Mike Crapo 2 years ago. And his reasonings for doing that was because he would have the entire election season instead of just getting stuck at the primary. He was a Republican, became independent. Now he's a Republican again. And he's been running this campaign for 6 months now. I think he's a good guy, smart guy, has a background in finance, very, very, very conservative. I think he would be a great choice. Obviously, he's a little bit older, just as Simpson is, so he wouldn't be there long. If he gets in there for the next 2 years and doesn't do a good job, well, we can find someone else. But the problem is you get people like Mike Simpson in office, and once they get a foothold in there, and once they start building these alliances with PACs and power brokers, it's very hard to get them out. It's very hard to get incumbents out. Yes, sir.
He voted for codifying same-sex marriage and banning states from supporting traditional marriage. He voted to extend adult dependents, employment visa holders. He voted to pass $817 billion defense spending bill without funding military vaccine mandates. I can go on.
Yes, there's a million reasons to vote against Mike Simpson.
So let's go to the other two. I emailed back and forth to Sean Gibbons. I couldn't get any solid answers from him. And you talked about, I asked him about that too. I know that a lot of people, Scott Cleveland also talked to him about solidifying politics. So I think we need to vote for Scott Cleveland. I don't know about Nampa and these other areas, but all we have in Ada County to choose was that. The rest of any candidate for legislative offices that are running in Rockland, they're running, well, I think we don't have anybody running against them. County Commission, we've got two choices to vote. One is District 1 is 2 women, and District 2 is 4 women. So, you want me to shut up? Let's shut up.
Well, I can play off where you're going with that.
So the candidates for Commissioner 1 are Ryan Davidson, he's the incumbent, and Clyde Warner. I couldn't find anything out about Clyde. Ryan, I like things he stood for. A couple things, he really supported Labrador, and he really supported the Ryan Accord. And the statesman really against me. So that's who I'm voting for. And then the last choice is four that are running: Brandon Durst, Heather Luther, Sharon Holman, Tom Daly. And I asked these other ones, particularly Davidson, I said, you may want to bring the other commissioner. He wouldn't answer me, of course. I understand that. He said, I don't want to, make mad where wins, I guess. But Brandon Durst, a little apprehensive about him. He's a good Democrat. He's pretty young, in his 40s, but that's good. Sharon Allman, I don't know. I don't think she's bad, but she's kind of run and lost and run and jumped around, so I don't know. I didn't really want to make a strong,
So you basically covered it. Our Ada County Commission, you have in the District 1, you have Ryan Davidson, the incumbent. He won in 2020. same year as Trump was on the ballot, so that really helped with turnout. And he's very conservative. I've gotten to know him over the last few years. His opponent, Clyde Dornier, voted a Democrat ballot in 2022 for what that's worth. He ran for Eagle Fire Commission last fall and came in third out of 3. So personally, I believe that he was put on there by people who really don't like Ryan Davidson. The former leaders of the Ada County Republican Central Committee are supporting him. And there's a reason why they're the former leaders. In the other race, obviously, there's 4 people. Tom Daly, I like Tom. I think he's a nice guy. He's very experienced. He's been around a long time. He was in state legislature for a while. He worked in the Reagan administration as well as the Bush administration and the Trump administration. So he's been in the national level. He's been in state level. Good guy. He's fine. Heather Luther is an employee at Ada County. I don't remember which specific office she's in, but she's coming at it from the perspective of wanting to improve the processes from her point of view, which is as somebody who works under the commissioners. Sharon Ullman, as you said, she's run for many things. She's been on the commission several times. She's been off the commission. She's kind of a perennial candidate. She has reasonably good ideas, but like you said, she's been back and forth for a while. And then finally, Brandon Durst. He's had a very interesting career. He was a Democratic state senator when he was only in his 20s. He was extremely young. He's converted to the Republican cause, and unlike a lot of converts, a lot of people, when they switch from Democrat to Republican, they don't actually switch their views. They still have the same ideas. It's just that the parties have moved so far left that somebody who's standing still is now fitting in the other party. And those people usually try and move the party toward their own views, and that's a frustration. Brandon's not like that. He is super conservative, very socially conservative, Christian conservative, the type of person who would fit in this conversation here. He ran for state superintendent and took second in a 3-way race. He worked, I shared an office with him at Idaho Freedom Foundation for several months, and then he was hired as a superintendent up in North Idaho because some of the folks who saw him on the campaign trail for superintendent, they liked his ideas, and they brought him in. Unfortunately, there were some issues. He did not have the full certification that the state requires of you to be a superintendent. He went in expecting that he'd get a waiver, but he did not get it, and so he ended up, there was a huge shakeup there. The way I saw it is that you bring in somebody truly conservative to run a public school, and the system is going to fight back like, white blood cells fighting against infection. They do not want that. So, he's yeah, and yeah, I think he has some really interesting ideas, and I'd like to see what he can do on the county commission. So, those are your choices here. There's not many, like you said, there's not many choices in the legislature. Most people here, you're in congressional District 2, so your choices are, Congressman Mike Simpson or Scott Cleveland or Sean Higgins. But really, again, what I was trying to say with trying to understand the game, the tactics, rather than just seeing it from a kind of more naive point of view, is that, well, it applies to this race because you have if you're not going to actually campaign, if you're not going to actually go and speak to people, if you're just going to put your name on the ballot and wait to see what happens, you're actually doing your cause harm rather than help. Unfortunately, there's not much to know about judges. It's a messed up system. They put them on the ballot even though they're not competitive. It's just saying, do we retain them or not? I do not know personally anything about the judges because it's very difficult to find that information. It's something I'm going to look into putting on my website in the future to see if there's any, because a lot of people are asking that. That's something I've heard for the last 2 years. Right.
One of the things that that you can do is to abstain from those races. And I think this system's broken, and one of the ways that we can signal that, it's not going to change it overnight, but one of the ways we can signal that is by simply not voting.
Well, that's good, fine, tomorrow. And then
Yeah.
primary, but when it comes to the fall, when there are, because we have, do you vote Democrat primary or Republican?
Right.
And you mentioned the, what do you call it? You want to switch it here to the what's going on in Alaska? What do you
So there's an initiative that will likely be on the ballot in November. It's jungle primary and ranked choice voting. It's actually making 2 changes, and people aren't aware that the people who are taking the initiative around to get signatures, they're selling it as an open primary, which it's not. Idaho used to have an open primary where you'd go and you could request any ballot. The Republicans forced the state to allow them to close the primary. Only registered Republicans can vote on a Republican ballot tomorrow. Well, this isn't even an open primary. This is a jungle primary. It takes away all party identification. It just dumps everybody on the same ballot, and then you vote for one, and then the top 4 go on to the general election where it's a ranked choice voting system, where instead of filling in one circle, you write in my first choice, second choice, third choice, and fourth choice. And then when they tally it, which is a really complicated process, the lowest vote getter is dropped off. And so if that was your first choice, well, then it'll do your second choice. But what if you didn't write your second choice? Well, then you don't actually vote. It's a complex process that's the purpose of which is to get more moderates into office. It will make it more difficult for conservatives because you say you have a conservative on the ballot and a Democrat and then a moderate Republican. The Democrat's probably going to be the last choice off. They're going to be eliminated. And then all the Democrat voters, their second choice is going to be the moderate Republican. And that's what happened to Sarah Palin up in Alaska. She won. She had a plurality of votes on the first ballot, but then in the end, all the Democrat voters supported her opponent. So that is likely going to be on the ballot this November. They say they have enough signatures. They're still verifying it, but it'll probably be there. So that's another thing. On our ballot this November, a lot of the here in Boise, you're going to have a choice between a Democrat and a Republican for legislature. And you'll vote Republican, but the Democrat will win because we're in Boise. But you're also going to have our presidential election on the ballot, Trump or Biden or whomever, they fill in if something happens. And you're going to have that ranked choice voting initiative on the ballot. So getting to vote and getting your neighbors to vote, it actually is going to be important in November as well as here in May.
So we want to make sure that we all understand that. We want to understand that so everybody that can understands that by this fall, so we don't blow it.
Yeah, that's that's an important goal for the Republican Party and for political activists and PACs and organizations. It's getting the word out about voting against this initiative.
I'm wondering
Take
if
Brian's.
anybody else has questions for any of us.
Ask these guys some questions, huh?
Anything that bothers you, that intrigues you, that you have questions on politically,
I can't talk to specific candidates or. Whoa. That's my fault. I caused that. So I can't talk to specific, or I don't have a question regarding specific candidates or questions, but I do have, can you hear now? I do have a question to follow up on the ranked choice voting, because that's a thing that's moving and happening. You said that is a solution, but you don't think it is a right solution. So to the panel, what is a right solution, and where could we go, in your opinion, to make voting better?
Well, So I'm actually intrigued by the idea of ranked choice voting, just in a kind of a theoretical world. But in the real world examples we've seen, like I said, it serves to just lock out conservatives and elect moderates, which is what people have been trying to do here for so many years. I think just more involvement is what's necessary, more education. People have to care about what's happening in their government. And we've seen, and like I said, we've seen a lot of awakening because of COVID and the lockdowns, but there's still a lot of people that just don't care. They don't see the point. They don't see why it's important. And, that's why, one of the most cynical things about learning the political process is the understanding that most voters, they completely tune the process out until maybe a few days before the election, or maybe as they're driving to the polling place, if they even bother to vote at all. And whatever sign they see on the way into the polling place, or whatever text message they got last, or whatever mailer they got, that's the name that's going to stick in their head, and then they'll vote. So a lot of that is just getting people to vote. It's just getting your name out there. That's why so many mailers and so many commercials are so, in my opinion, very lowbrow. It's, my opponent is just a mean old jerk. Vote for me. There's no substance to it. What the electorate has demanded. You talk about how supply and demand. People demand really simplified political explanations. So I don't know where it starts. Maybe in churches, maybe in community groups. Raising the discourse. Let's get people to care. Let's get people who want to get in there and understand things. And that, I think, would go a long way towards solving a lot of our problems.
Yeah, so if
push for ranked choice voting is in these places like here where they want to push us. It's all Democrat push.
Yeah.
That's who's supporting and pushing it to make red states purple, or states like Alaska lost. So we don't really want to change in the way, I don't want to change in the way we do it here. Leave it Republicans vote in Republican primaries. We don't want a state where Democrats can cross over and vote in Republican primary just to get the most liberal people in. Idaho, there's Democrats running as Republicans because it's a Republican state. So, we have the left and the right within the Republican Party here. So we don't need that change. We want to leave it the way it is. And you are, so you're going to be letting us know who you are here.
well, yeah. So when we're done, my plan was to whatever the candidates were that showed up. But since we're on the topic, the only one who did show up, at least who's running for the state legislature, is Jackie Davidson. So afterwards, you can, she'll be happy to. There's a number of us here that are running for precinct committeeman positions. So to jump onto what Brian was saying, as I've been out in my own precinct talking with voters, one of the things that I find is people know that the legacy media can't be trusted. And they have found alternatives to cover the national scene. But the thing that they have not found is something that covers the local scene, because they know they can't, ktvb.com, not only can they not trust them, but those guys hate us. The Idaho Statesman, the Press Tribune, the Capital Sun, they know that they're not going to hear the truth from these media sources. And that's why I am carrying around Brian's cards and handing them out to literally everybody I talk to. Because, Brian, during the legislative session, how many hours a week are you spending at the State House?
Physically there, I was there probably 3 days a week on average.
Yeah.
And virtually there, quiet a bit longer. Even on days I wouldn't come in, I just, walk into my home office in my pajamas and turn on the House stream and the Senate stream and the committee streams and watch for anything interesting. And usually I was live tweeting it, and if anything really interesting happened, I'd write an article about it.
Yeah. So most of us are not able to spend 3 to 5 days a week down at the State House. But here's one person who can do that on our behalf. And I thank God for Brian that he is making available 80+% of his work totally for free. And so not only can you take, his card, but take a little bit of a stack with you, and or maybe wait and see. Read him for a couple months and see if it's valuable. But I think one of the things we have to do is solve the information problem. We have to round the corner of the information problem. A lot of people know that stuff is broken, although there's also a lot of people who don't know. And so that's where, if you don't want to see your state go sideways, then get involved. And it may be that you only, talk to 20 people. But that's what precinct, so just to give an idea of what a healthy grassroots party structure looks like, you don't just have precinct committeemen who are good folks, but every single one of those guys has an alternate and, 10 to 12 block captains, which are basically just people that are willing to talk to the people up and down their street. And so the precinct committeeman has a team of 10 block captains and says, here's the message that we want to get out. We want to inform registered Republicans of such and such. And they have their team of block captains, and those block captains are having conversations with the people who oftentimes they can see them make light work. That's what Idaho doesn't have right now, and that's what Idaho needs to have. So every person here could be a block captain, could be an alternate precinct committeeman. Yes?
Hi. So I want to know, who to vote for, who's a true conservative, because it's just coming to my attention that, just because they're a Republican doesn't mean that they're a Republican. So how do I vote for a true conservative in this area? And where do I go to get that information? Because I don't have time to do research on each candidate.
Yep.
So where should I go to get that information to know who's a true conservative?
Yep.
I just need to give it to me straight.
Yep. So here we are, the eve of the primary. And so things like the eve of the primary. And so it's a little bit late to go back and read 6 months worth of Brian's stuff. So I don't know if, Brian, you want to tackle this question.
Well, there's all sorts of resources out there. It's just a question of how to find them. What I did on my website this year is, instead of just doing a voter guide of saying, hey, vote for these people, I put every single candidate, created a profile for each one, linked to their website, their social media, a little bit of a bio for them. If they're an incumbent, I linked to several of their legislator scores. Idaho Freedom Foundation does something called the Freedom Index, where they don't actually rate legislators, they rate bills. So every bill that comes before the House floor and the Senate floor is rated on a scale based on a transparent metric. It is very cool. Does it grow government? Does it shrink government? Does it expand into the private sector? Does it give back to the private sector? Does it raise taxes? Does it lower taxes? There's 12 of those metrics. And each one that applies makes it go up one, go down one. And eventually it has a number. Maybe it's +1, maybe it's -1, maybe it's +4, it's a really great bill, or maybe it's -4, it's not so great a bill. And then as lawmakers vote on it, that creates a score. It's just simple math. Maybe not so simple math, but it's math. And at the end of the year, they have scores of maybe 95%. That person votes solidly for liberty, or maybe it's 50%. It's about half the time. It is a tool. I tell people it's not the end-all, be-all, but it is a very valuable tool. If you're trying to decide between someone who's 78% and 76%, okay, that's they're basically the same. Sometimes you have somebody who's 90% and somebody who's 70%, but you look at the important bills and they voted basically the same. It's just on a lot of little stuff that they were different. But if you've got a Republican whose score is 30%, then you've got some problems. That person is essentially ideologically a Democrat. So that is one valuable tool. Nicholas I believe, has a box of those to hand out here. The new one is very cool. I love what they did with the cover this year. But that shows you all the legislators and their scores on the Freedom Index and the Spending Index, which is slightly different metrics for budget bills. And those range from 100%, meaning they voted really solidly on not spending too much of your money, all the way down to like 3%, which is unfortunately a lot of Republicans. They voted for every budget they saw. They don't care. They just rubber stamp it. So anyway, what I did is on my website, I call it the primary polls because I love alliteration. You can go and see a profile for every candidate, including incumbents. And the incumbents, you can see their Freedom Index score. You can also see their IACI score, the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry. It's the voice of big business in Idaho. They give scores too. They rate about usually 12 to 20 bills a year. And those bills, they don't have transparent metrics like IFF has. They have just, we either support the bill or we don't support the bill. And then that's how their lawmakers generate their scores. Somebody with a high IACI score is probably not very conservative. And usually that correlates fairly well with a low Freedom Index, and vice versa. And then there's a lot of people in the middle who have middling IACI scores and middling Freedom Index scores. Those guys, you can usually work with them. You can have conversations with them. But I think that's a valuable resource. And when you look, one thing I also include on there is endorsements, because that's a good way to see who's who. Because there's organizations out there on both sides who, they do the research. They figure out who will support their agendas. And so if somebody is endorsed by Conservatives by Idaho Freedom PAC, by Citizens Alliance of Idaho, you can be sure they're probably fairly conservative. If someone's endorsed by the IACI, the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, the Idaho Farm Bureau, the Fraternal Order of Police, the Professional Firefighters of Idaho, the Win Ag PAC, that's the big big agriculture groups, then they're probably more establishment. They're probably less conservative because they're willing to spend all your taxpayer money on these businesses and organizations. And there's almost no overlap between the two. There's very few people who are endorsed by both Idaho Freedom PAC and IACI. In fact, I doubt there's any. So that's almost an easy indicator to tell. Obviously, do your research. A lot of folks, Brian Lenny says that the R next to people's name stands for research, not Republican. But that's a good place to start. That's a very, just off the top, that's a great indicator of who is who. If they're endorsed by IACI, they're probably establishment, moderate. If they're endorsed by Idaho Freedom PAC or Citizens Alliance, they're probably conservative. If you go to my website go to the primary polls, you can see each of the profiles. Just click on a race or click on a candidate, and you'll see the list of endorsements. And just remember, IACI, they're generally the moderates.
At best.
Real quick, if you go to Conservatives of Idaho, they have a voter guide right on the front page. And I'm sure they're going to probably agree with Nicholas, do they agree with pretty much everything that you have in your IFF index? Okay. Okay.
I know something on, not to preach too much about the Idaho Freedom Index, but something I really enjoy is sometimes organizations, they'll give a score, and they'll show the principles for that score, and then you'll be like, well, what was on the back end? I want to see the paperwork, I want to see the math. If you go to any specific senator or anyone that's run for any amount of time and they've done scoring on it, you can go to the bottom and click, and you can see all the different bills that IFF has rated that have made up that score, and you can kind of do that back-end research if you want to see how they got there on the website. That's something I've noticed some people have missed.
There's the legislative website is really handy because you can see every bill, read the text, see who voted for it, but there's no backwards way to go to the legislators and see what they voted for. Whereas index.idahofreedom.org, you can click on a legislator and you can actually see how they voted on every bill that IFF rated.
There are 4 people up on stage. What was the question each of you was hoping that someone would ask?
My question that I was hoping somebody to ask, and I've asked legislators or legislative candidates this question, and the answer is very telling and surprising at times. How do you apply your faith, not my faith, but your faith, to your legislative decision making process and your legislative candidacy? That would be my question right there. And none of the indexes that have been mentioned will answer that. You have to do that on your own. You have to go to a meeting. These people will very much engage you. Be prepared for a shock with the answer sometimes, though, because there are candidates that hold office. I don't want to name too many names, but I think this one's pretty safe. Julie Yamamoto professes to be a Christian. Her voting record is nothing Christian at all, in my opinion. So that's the question that I would ask. That's really what I would hope that we take away from this meeting more than anything, is how does what these people do affect our religious freedom, first of all, and God's will, second of all? I mean, or you can reverse that, but yeah.
I would just add to that, since you brought it up. I would say be careful with how you discuss these things. Just in that, if you go out and start say, we'll use Representative Yamamoto as an example. If you start attacking her personally, saying hey, I don't think you're a Christian because of the way you voted, that's really going to turn people off. That's going to we have to remember that those of us in this room are not normal. The normal people are the ones who have no idea that there's an election tomorrow. And they hear attacks like that, they just, oh, that's so mean. So we, one thing I'm really been preaching lately is let's keep it on the issues. Keep it on the issues. Don't attack people personally. Try not to call names. Just this is how you voted. This is the truth, and this is why we should vote for someone else.
The question. And everybody here is going to agree with this, but is voting a Christian duty? And the answer is yes. Well, how do you extrapolate that from the Scripture? Well, it's a principle of loving your neighbor as yourself. The policies that are coming down, even on the local level. I mean, if we had COVID 2.0 tomorrow, who do you want in charge on the local level? The leftists who will mask you and vaccine you, or freedom-loving, Christ-loving individuals. And so voting is a Christian duty, is what I would say.
Now, if there's a question, we'll go with that. But I know it might seem really, really simple, but I even had this doing research because I do my own content and things. But you might be like, who even is on the ballot? How do I even find that out? Sometimes that can be even tricky. If you want to, you can come up after. I can get you the link for it. But Ballotpedia has where you can put your address in, and it'll pull up all the people that are going to be on that ballot. It might not have like levies or bonds or whatever, but it'll give you a great jumping off point. So then you can go use these other resources to research. That would be a resource I'd offer.
Also, the Ada County website will do the same thing. You put in your address, and it'll actually show you a sample ballot of what you're going to see in the polling place. Which one? Oh. Well, I haven't actually sat down and dug deep into this. It's sitting in a browser bookmark waiting for me to have the time to really educate myself on it. But basically what happened is, state constitution says that the legislature must provide for a free and uniform public school system. And how that's interpreted over the years is, varies. But there was actually a court decision that says that the state needs to do more to fund education. It's not supposed to be necessarily on the backs of local property owners in the form of property tax. It's supposed to be the state legislature, and they have a complex funding formula. I don't remember if it's based on attendance or enrollment, but there's a big debate over that. Anyway, so in the governor's State of the State address, he advocated a plan where they're going to take some money out of sales tax and use that to bond for more money that they will then use to distribute to schools for facilities, so that all these schools, whether it's in Boise or some rural district, they can get their buildings renovated or rebuilt or whatever. So, and of course they have all the worst stories to share of, mold and collapsing buildings and whatnot. And so they eventually passed that. And again, it's a complex bill. I haven't sat down to research it, too deeply, but it's going to provide some state money for school facilities. Nevertheless, schools are still doing levies, and the whole point of it was to make it so schools didn't have to do levies and bonds. Because again, the whole point is to try and shift the burden away from local property owners and onto the state as a whole to distribute it more evenly. But nevertheless, in West Ada, that's where I am, there's a levy on the ballot that's, I don't remember how much money it is, but it's a lot of money, and people are grumping about it. They tried a plant levy a few months ago that was half $500 million over 10 years, and that was soundly defeated. They tried to sell it as a tax cut because it would have been slightly less than what we were paying at the time, but we got an even bigger tax cut by just defeating it. Everybody loves tax cuts, so when the governor sold this plan to shift some sales tax money over to schools, he called it a tax cut because theoretically, your property taxes are going to go down if the schools don't have to put out their own bonds and instead can use the state money. It's really a tax shift. The money, it's still our money. They're just moving it around. It's like a shell game. So again, that's why we need to pay close attention. I don't know. Does Boise have a school levy on the ballot? No? Oh, well, that's good.
With my understanding with the West Ada School District levy, and again, do your own research. I'm not looking at primary sources, so I'll be very upfront about that. But enrollment fell, and based on at least some degree of a legacy formula, their budget decreases along with the drop in enrollment. And basically, the West Ada School District doesn't want to have to send anybody home. They want to make up the difference and keep on all the same teachers and not take a budget cut. And this levy will impart, So if you own a business and you have fewer sales, then you're probably going to have to let some employees go. They have fewer kids to educate, but they don't want to let anybody go. I don't know if that jives with, anyways.
There was a question. I think somebody was talking about how does your Christian faith affect how you vote and who you support. And I will say that again, going along to what I was saying earlier about not necessarily calling names and just debating the issues, there's a lot of folks out there who I believe are genuine Christians, but they have a different view of a lot of legislation and even the role of government. And so that's something I think we need to have conversations. We need to talk to people, hear what they have to say, share what we have to say, without necessarily trying to excommunicate people because their freedom index dropped below 70.
Just to be clear, I did not mean to do that with that statement.
No, of course not.
Just ask the question of the people that you are ready to support and see what you get back.
A lot of people, a lot of candidates, I think, use their Christian faith, or especially if you're in Eastern Idaho, their LDS Christian faith, as a shield to avoid having to talk about the issues. A lot of people do that. The leftists do that too. You're supposed to support somebody because they're transgender or some specific skin color or some ethnicity, rather than actually asking, okay, what do you actually believe in? What do you support? How are you going to vote? And I think our side tries to do that too. And it's important to drill down. Okay, what's your worldview? What's your view of the role of government? What's your how are you going to vote on these issues? That's more important. And it really runs counter to, I think, how a lot of voters are wired. I was just having this conversation with someone today about Eastern Idaho. One of the reasons why, you look at Eastern Idaho, their freedom index scores are way low compared to here and up in the north end, North Idaho. And why is that? We're all Idahoans. We're all mostly Republicans. We're all Christians of, various flavors. So why the difference? And a lot of times, and I was talking to someone from Eastern Idaho about this, and he said it's all about your relationships. I support this person not because of how they vote, but because they're an elder in my church, and I trust them, and that's as far as it goes. And so I think we got to get past that temptation to just support people based on our feelings or based on their positions in our lives, and say, okay, well, how are you actually going to vote? That's really the important thing. I agree.
Amen.
And there's people that call themselves Christians that vote wrong on those things, and we gotta vote against them.
And voting against a legislator is not, it's not like you're condemning them to hell or anything. You're just saying, I thanks for your hard work. I've decided to go in a different direction, and we're going with someone else this time. It's like filling slots on a basketball team. There's a guy who's going to score 5 more points a game, so we're going to go with him instead of you. So it doesn't have to be personal.
I don't know if I'm off the range here, but if there's anybody that has any questions related to, I'm trying to research something, I'm trying to research a race or a thing, and I'm struggling to find resources, please ask by all means, because we are both all researching this very, very regularly and would love to answer those, but it can be hard sometimes to know exactly if there's something specific there.
Maybe.
Are we recording, John?
Our two panelists here on the right are both Canyon County guys. Yep. We're live streaming it, and this could get watched later. So.
The goals are, anybody is, and they live in Canyon County. We talked about Ada County, the 3 things we can vote on here. I know nothing about Canyon County, the things that we do. Maybe guide whoever's listening on who they should vote for tomorrow in Canyon County or any of the other districts.
Can I add to that? Also, are there any measures, Ada County or Canyon County, that are of concern tomorrow?
There's a bill on the Canyon County ballot. And again, if you go to Canyon County elections, you can just Google it. You can do the same thing for Ada County. It'll give you a sample ballot for each county and what's on there. You put in your address. They're not uniform between the 2 counties. And surprisingly, actually, Canyon County has a better website in this regard, but it's a lot easier to find. But you put in your address, it will pull up a sample ballot of everything that's on there. The levy, the only levy thing that I voted on, because I voted early, I'm working the polls tomorrow, is an ambulance levy. They want to add another ambulance station. This isn't fiscally responsible, so I don't know where Nicholas is, but close your ears. But the growth in Canyon County has exploded. The population, go to Costco on any day of the week, I don't care what day it is, and probably 85% of who's in Costco is older than me, which is old. No, but in all seriousness, so I mean, and they keep adding homes out on farmland, out the way that I live. We probably are going to need that ambulance service because the closest one is about 6 miles away. And if you try and drive that 6 miles in traffic, it takes about 30 minutes, probably even with an ambulance light on. I'm not saying support it or not support it. I'm just saying that's the levy issue that's on there right now. I'm in Canyon County. I did want to address something though. We also have a couple of three-way races. And in Canyon County, and Christian principles are applied in some people's decision making. Obviously, I'm one of them. And if you make that public, be prepared to be chastised for it and vilified for it, even because it's happened. And all of the scenarios combined, we go to church together, we go shooting together, we do this together, we do that together, and he's a former pastor, so I'm voting for him. Well, I asked him the question that I gave to you all, and the response was that being a civil magistrate was a higher calling than being a pastor at church, which I knew immediately to be wrong. I didn't call him out, and this was at a meeting. Didn't call him out on it. I just was like, that seals the deal for me right there, along with the behaviors that he's applied to his campaign, which are not Christian. This is a personal experience, very personal. The minute somebody found out that I was voting for not him, I was toast as far as they were concerned. And that was just one item on one vote for one person. Not a crucial race, really.
Yeah, like I said, that was my article today on the Gem State Chronicle, is about those three-way races and how tough they are to decide. And really, and it's probably something I need to write about in the future, is how we need to look at politics as a system that we figure out the strategy to win, rather than as just a debate club. Those three-way races, especially when it's two conservatives against a moderate or a leftist, those will kill us almost every time. Because it just makes your job that much harder. And I say this without any malice. You have to have some ego to put your name on a ballot. You have to be willing to say, I can do this job. I am a great choice for this job, and that's not a bad thing. But then when you get two people on the ballot who maybe agree on a lot of things, and they both think the other one should be the one to drop out, it can really lead to some hard feelings. And then when you get supporters of both sides, and they have that same argument, it can lead to more hard feelings. The race over in District 10, the Speaker of the House, Mike Moyles, being challenged by Rachel Hayslip. I like both. I can see the reasons why you would support either one. However, there's been some really intense disagreement among conservatives, among people who are generally in agreement about things, over that race. And that's a thing we have to remember, that even when we have these disagreements, let's debate, let's discuss. Iron sharpens iron, I always say. But in the end of the day, let's be able to, let's not burn so many bridges, let's not end so many friendships that we can't, at the end of the day, get back together and continue to fight the real enemy. Jackie Davidson here is running for legislature in District 16. On the other side of the ballot in District 16, we actually have a competitive Democrat primary, which is not usual. This is Colin Nash was the representative here. He went on to become a member of the Boise City Council, so that left an opening, and a lot of people wanted to fill that opening. So the person who was actually appointed to that seat by the governor is a fellow named Todd Achilles. He got the lowest score in the Freedom Index. He's like 10 points lower than the other Democrats, which is amazing. But then he's running, one of his challengers there is a female to male transgender person who, obviously if that person wins, that is going to be the number one thing everyone's going to talk about. That will bring national attention. It happened in Colorado, it happened in Montana. Every time one of those people got into the legislature, it brings national attention, and it'll turn Idaho into the flashpoint for that battle. and there's two other people running too, but it's probably coming down between those two. So that's our real enemy here. We can disagree among Republicans. We can even disagree among conservatives, among Christians. We can have different viewpoints. Let's have our disagreements, and then, well, tomorrow night, Wednesday morning, we need to then unite, because the next enemy, the real enemy, is much worse than anyone, on our side.
I would also urge, the Republican Party is very fractured and splintered, and has been for a while, since I've lived here pretty much. I don't know if I'm on or not, but okay. Just because you disagree with somebody once or twice or even 20% of the time, if you agree 80% of the time, and it's not a non-negotiable like abortion or one of those topics, you need to do the Christian thing and move on, and not consider that person an enemy, not throw them off the cliff. I see this happen very, very often where we live. And it's like, I'm mesmerized by it. That 80-20 rule, by the way, came from one of probably the most conservative presidents we've ever had, and the first one I voted for, Ronald Reagan.
Just remember, what is the 20% and what is the 80%? Like you said, there are some non-negotiables there. If we agree on all the major issues, and that's what I was saying about the Freedom Index, sometimes you'll find someone who's at a 70%, and yet on the major issues, on the non-negotiable issues, on the social issues, the issues of morality, they're the same as a 95%. It's on a lot of the little things, a lot of the little regulations, little spending. Yeah, they could be better, but they're not too bad. So be careful about who you throw off the cliff.
If I could too, just add for the record, there is a crowd here in Idaho that's invoking Reagan's 80-20 thing. It's a constant drumbeat. And so first I want to say I agree with it. Again, you could take the five of us and we're going to have disagreement at some point. The problem is that is being invoked a lot here in the last several months, and there's an unstated assumption that the people who are invoking that want you to believe, they want you to swallow that pill, and that's that you actually agree with some of these people 80% of the time. But the people who that quote is being used in their defense of, you'd be lucky if they agree with you 20% of the time. They disagree with you far more than they agree. And yet you're being told that by wanting to vote against such a person that you're not being big tent enough. Oh.
Brian,
You specialize in, yeah.
So 2 years ago at the Twin Falls Republican Convention, Dorothy Moon won the vote for state chair by almost 200 votes. It was a massive landslide over the incumbent Tom Luna. Tom Luna had only defeated Mark Fuller of Bonneville County by 12 votes in 2020, my first convention. So the party was almost evenly matched, and then 2 years ago, it completely flipped toward the conservative side. Those former leaders, led by Tom Luna, did not like that, and they want to take over the party again. How do you take over the party? You win PC races, because it's PCs who control who goes as delegates to the convention. And so they are dumping hundreds of thousands of dollars. They call themselves the Gem State Conservatives. Former state chair Tom Luna, former state chair Trent Clark, Tyler Hurst, Ashley Britton. They've even roped in former Governor Butch Otter is now sending out endorsements for PCs on their list because they're trying to win these PC races. And these PCs are not necessarily grassroots conservatives. The incumbent PCs, the ones who are running, who we would support, they are the ones who have gone to meetings. They are the ones who volunteered. They volunteered their time and energy for the caucus in February. Was it February or March? March, yeah. Well, we were leading up to it for 6 months. So those are the ones who are actually doing the work. Trent Clark, I've had many disagreements with him. He and I, we argue all the time. He went on the Neil and Julie show recently and was explaining why he's doing what he's doing, why he's supporting the PCs he's supporting. And he's saying that a good PC is somebody who makes cookies, blows up balloons. because they're frustrated because the PCs who are involved now, they voted for a chair that he doesn't like, and they're actually willing to speak their minds. These PCs who are in there now are saying, wait a second, these legislators that represent us are not following our platform. They're not following conservative principles. They're voting with Democrats more than half the time. And the former leadership, they don't like that. So they've raised up all these candidates. In many cases, they literally just called their old friends who are lobbyists or former politicians on the phone and says, hey, sign up to run for PC in this slot, and we'll give you money. In fact, they're controlling the campaign from one central location, which is ironic because PCs are supposed to represent neighborhoods and communities in diverse places throughout the state. You can tell because they all have the same signs, whether you go to here in Boise or Coeur d'Alene or Idaho Falls, they all have the same sign with the white elephant on it. Of course, a white elephant is something that nobody wants. They send out text messages that all look the same. And again, they roped in the former governor to give endorsements. He probably isn't even aware of what's going on here. It is a mass-produced campaign to try and win back control of the Republican Party so that they can, they can be in charge. They don't like the fact that someone else is in charge. Dorothy Moon actually listens to the constituents. She listens to the people. Tom Luna sued the people when they didn't do what he wanted. So that's what's going on. That's what this organization is. And yeah, they're using that Reagan quote because they really don't like the fact that PCs and the Republican Party are calling out leftists. They want to expand the tent. They want the big tent to go to the left, whereas the people who are currently in power in the Republican Party, they say, no, we need to adhere to these principles. This is our tent. If you want to come in it, you have to agree with Republican values. It's not about building the tent bigger so that it dilutes the entire meaning of what a Republican value or a conservative principle really is. Well, I mean, I think there are some people who would be happy if people like Lauren McLean and Ilana Rubel registered as Republican, because then we can say, look, we've increased the size of the tent. But obviously, that's ridiculous. If we don't stand on some solid principle, then what's the point? We're just we're just a club. Oh, they wanted to unite until the moment Dorothy Moon won that election, and then they were very grumpy. They ran to the Statesman and the other left-wing media to complain about extremists taking over the party.
Yeah, that's why I jumped up, because Tom didn't know what he was stepping into, but that is their favorite refrain. And again, by any of the metrics, when you're looking at the people who they're defending, they don't agree with you 80% of the time. That's the premise that you're being asked to swallow. And then if you do, then you've just lost the argument, right? So we need to push back and say, wait a minute. The people who you're defending, they were registered Democrats last election cycle. They donate to progressive causes. They march in pride parades. These are the people who we're being told we agree with 80% of the time. No, it's not the case. So if they actually agree with you 80% of the time, let's be friends. But question the assumption.
Well, and also remember, in the primary, we're having a debate within the party over who's going to be our nominees for the general election. And so this is where we have the debates over a lot of the differences between Republicans. Wednesday, we're going to come back together and, okay, we're going to put those differences aside for now because we have a bigger fight ahead with people that we disagree on much more things with. Within the primary, okay, we can disagree about taxes or about how far a library bill should go. After the primary, well, we're on the same side as far as not electing a transgender to the legislature.
So this one's for Josh. Going back to what we were talking about earlier with the Romans 13 thing and people bringing that up as a way to sort of bully people into being silent and just doing as they're told. I was wondering if you could give us a good response against that sort of message.
Yeah. In Romans 13, it says 2 or 3 times that the magistrate is God's servant. So I agree that we are supposed to honor the magistrates that God has ordained and appointed for us. And the responsibility of the magistrate is he is to serve God. And so that means that he has to serve according to God's law. And if he doesn't, then he's playing the part of a robber. Calvin, in the Institutes, he dedicated the Institutes to the King of France. And he said, any king who does not bring his kingdom under Christ plays the part of a robber and not the part of a king. And so the drum that needs to get, look, at this point, I mean, we're not at that 4th box right now, are we? But that will come if our nation continues to disobey and disregard God. So it is the duty of the citizens and even Christian citizens, the church, to rise up and say, hey, you know what? We want to obey the magistrate, and we will as far as our conscience can take us, but the magistrate must obey God. And I will say this, you brought up Romans 13 earlier. Nero was the Caesar when Paul wrote those words, and God took him out by 68 AD. So God raised up Nero to do his work in terms of punishing the Jewish nation for crucifying the Lord and rejecting the gospel. And then by 68 AD, the Senate had called him back and convicted him and was going to crucify him. And Nero ran to the countryside and he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the neck. So Psalm 2 is like the key text for having confidence in our age. Psalm 2 says, kiss the Son, O you kings of the earth, lest he become angry and you perish in the way. And that is written specifically to magistrates. So yes, we should obey, and magistrates have an even greater duty to obey God. They do not get a blank check. That's a lie.
I mean, also similar on that, I think you would agree, Josh. What authority are they doing that upon?
Out of Roman, in Romans 13, it says, therefore one must be in subjection not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God attending to this very need. They go on to talk about the purpose of the magistrates. The purpose of the authorities is to serve their subjects. And you know, the Reformation was trying to be crushed by the Roman Catholic, by the Pope, and in Magdeburg, that one town in Germany, they stood up against the whole government and interposed themselves between the authorities and their subjects and said, we're not going to make them do that. That's kind of what the Florida governor did through a lot of this coronavirus thing. He stood between, he interposed himself between the federal government and his people and protected his people. That's the job of our local magistrates too. They're supposed to serve their people, not the tyrant above them. And I want to avoid that, but you kind of led us into it.
I wrote in my article this morning that, or yesterday morning, that Thomas Jefferson, one of his mottos was rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And that's something we should keep in mind, but God also gave us a brain that can reason. Just going out there, with a gun and trying to start the next American Revolution is not going to help anything, as much fun as it sounds. So that's why we have to be very prudent and work within the spheres that we have available to us. And right now, that is the political sphere. That is the ballot box. So.
Yeah, so there's actually a really good resource on this. We just hosted John Eidsmoe, who gave a talk, so you guys can look at our YouTube channel and see his talk. He's a constitutional scholar. His resume is longer than it's. Yeah, he's an author. Yep. The Reformation, yeah. Well, let's conclude. I'll pray, and then we have an opportunity to just talk, one-on-one, or you can corner people up here. This is just a good forum. So, Lord, we, once again, we're so grateful that we're able to do this. We're grateful that we can exercise the soapbox and the ballot box. That things, again, you have given us an embarrassment of riches, Lord. And so, Lord, help us while we still have these means to exercise them. We know that there are uglier things than even war, but that list is short. War is an ugly thing. We do not want this to come to blows. And so, Lord, we ask for your mercy upon us. We know that we do not deserve deliverance. Right now, we're under rulers and civil magistrates that we deserve. So, Lord, we ask for your mercy and your kindness upon us. Lord, please help us out of the desperate straits we're in. May the civil magistrates, the rulers for human joy and flourishing. Amen. Thank you guys for coming.